Good morning. Thanks for joining me on the Meg Ellison Show. I sincerely appreciate you tuning in as always. My next guest this morning during this hour is our friend from Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. Can't say enough great things about all the work, the important work that they do to preserve our freedoms and liberties. Not only preserve, but defend our freedoms and liberties and take those government entities or individuals to court when they are indeed overtly breaking, not even sometimes not so overtly breaking the law. Good morning, Will Flanders. How are you?
Good morning. Doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So you are Will's research director. First of all, let's talk a little bit about your role with Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, and then we'll get into the topic of the morning.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've been up here almost 10 years now, so it's surprising to think
Wow.
that. But, I think I'm in my 10th year, as we discussed this morning. But, I do a lot of the data work for Will, primarily focus on a lot of education issues. But obviously, we've talked on a number of issues over the years from, election integrity to healthcare, a lot of different areas that we get involved in. But my role is basically to look at what the data says and put some hard facts behind some of the positions that on the conservative libertarian spectrum that we'd like to support.
Doctor of Data. That's what we'll start calling you.
That works. I like that title.
Maybe it'll stick. I don't know. Just tell all of your peers that that's how you'd like to be referred to. So let's talk, because obviously, not to bring up something that will make everyone feel queasy, but the makeup of the state Supreme Court here in Wisconsin has changed, and there is obviously talk of repealing Act 10. And I know that you've done some data investigation or some investigation as to what would happen if Act 10 were repealed here in Wisconsin.
Yeah, that's right. We've seen since Judge Protasewicz was elected, a lot of different issues being brought to the forefront. The left is pretty emboldened to try some different things. We've talked about potential threats to school choice, and another one that maybe even a more real threat at the moment is the notion that Act 10 could be overturned. There was a lawsuit filed in November making the argument that because police and firefighters are exempt from Act 10, that this is a violation of the 14th Amendment. But without even getting into the details of the case, there's reason to think that it's a weak case. But again, with the composition of the court, you can't take anything for granted. We just wanted to see what it would mean to school districts if this legislation actually went away. And what we found is that over time, there's been a tremendous savings to school districts over time from Act 10 in a variety of different areas. Just looking at, for example, contributions to retirement. School districts around the state are still spending less today. Even with all the inflation we've had under Joe Biden, we're still spending less today on retirement than they were prior to Act 10. And if Act 10 went away, we estimate a new cost of about $422 million a year. Some of the other new costs are from healthcare, $560 million a year annually. Adding all of this together, we'd be looking at about a $1.6 billion hole in budgets that school districts would have to fill on an annual basis if Act 10 were to disappear. So that's a huge gap that no district really can handle.
So, not to play devil's advocate, but sometimes it's kind of fun to do that. So what is it that Democrats embrace? I mean, actually there's no devil's advocate. Let's just be honest about what it is that they want to undo with Act 10 and how this will, again, harm the taxpayers here in Wisconsin.
Yeah, so I think, just as we see in a lot of different contexts, right, the left is empowered and emboldened and funded to some extent by teachers' unions. And, a lot of what governs the decisions they make is what will help teachers' unions. We've seen the narrative from DPI in recent weeks that we have this massive teacher shortage. We can dispute that to some extent, and that we don't pay teachers enough. There's another whole argument to have there. But they see this as a positive for teachers, and therefore, whatever the cost to taxpayers, sort of be darned. I won't say the other word on the air, but we won't be. Whatever will help teachers is all that really matters, and that's what governs their push to end Act 10. Whether taxpayers are screwed over doesn't really matter.
Well, and I have to ask is that there were many teachers in Wisconsin that, well, I don't know if many is once they have realized the positive contribution that Act 10 has made to the state of Wisconsin, teachers, I think, in great part, are in favor of keeping this act in effect.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. What we've seen across the state is over half of teachers' unions have decertified. So about 60% of Wisconsin school districts no longer even have a union. And that's because on an annual basis, teachers have to vote whether the union is actually doing something that helps them. And in many cases around the state, they said that it's not. What we've seen from some national research in recent weeks by a professor from Stanford University and some other folks is that Act 10 has really worked to allow school districts to reward teachers who do a good job. Teachers that get results are able to be paid more rather than just sort of the old system under the union dominance of the longer you're in the system, the more you get paid, and that's the only sort of way to move up. So, teachers that are effective in the classroom absolutely have benefited under Act 10. And I agree. There's definitely a split opinion among teachers as to whether or not they'd want it to go away.
Well, and again, I think that once the positives within each community in Wisconsin have been realized, it's a more difficult sell. So I guess you, as a representative of Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, are poised. Your organization is poised to defend Act 10 once I guess we see it elevated to, which it is, elevated to the Supreme Court. Do you believe that there is a significant chance that it will be repealed?
Well, look, you see what happened with the maps, right? They used the excuse of these little islands that had been in existence for many generations of political maps in Wisconsin to say these aren't contiguous, therefore we need to throw out the maps entirely. When another remedy might have been just to make sure those little islands of districts are connected, right? You could have imagined a much more straightforward remedy than what was used. So, the case here, it does seem to give them an angle. And again, I'll say I'm one of the non-lawyers that will. I always put that caveat on this, but it gives them an angle that if they want to, push forward and overturn it, there's certainly reason to fear that it could happen. Now, us and others will obviously be fighting as hard as we can and making the best arguments we can why that shouldn't be the case. And I think I think it's a pretty weak argument in general, but there's definitely a kernel there that could give this court the sort of ability to overturn the whole thing, and it's something folks should really be cognizant of and paying attention to.
So, and I'm going to keep pressing on this. Do you believe that? This is a hill that the Democrats want to die on. Do you believe that they will that the majority of their constituents are in support of repealing Act 10?
I think that what we see is folks on the left tend to think of money as monopoly money, right? They think it's just something that exists and we can spend it whether we have it or not in many cases. And I think that's what you see here. When Judge Protasewicz was elected, behind the scenes we weren't hearing as much about the school choice case. There's some folks on the left that thought Kirk Bangstad was going out on a limb and really shouldn't be doing what he was doing. But this has been a target of the left for the entire decade since the law was passed, right? You still have the folks in Madison on a weekly basis singing their songs at lunchtime to bemoan the loss of union power. This is a major sticking point for the left, and I'd argue maybe one of their number one targets other than the maps when Protasewicz was elected.
It's really interesting, Will, that there are those that the professional protester class that continues to make to argue in favor of higher taxes and more misery for their fellow citizens here in Wisconsin. You'd think that these people were paid to do this, and for in some respects, we saw this during the whole Act 10 legislation when it was initially debated. We saw the meltdown from those on the left and the level of protesting. But I guess I am concerned that those of us that see the benefits of Act 10, that we have to make the public again, another campaign to make them aware of what will be lost if indeed Act 10 is repealed.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked to some school district folks as we were doing this piece to kind of say what would Act 10 mean. What would Act 10 mean to your district if it went away? And the superintendent of Kettle Moraine, it's a suburban Milwaukee district, told us it would be devastating. There would be massive cuts required. Again, imagine anything. Think about anything in your life. Is there anything you're spending less on than you were in 2009? I assume the case is likely no, unless it's maybe cable TV or something like that, where we cut the cord. But in almost every case, we're spending more than we were 13 years ago. But with Act 10, with retirement costs and healthcare costs, it's actually really cut the cost curve to the extent that districts are, in many cases, spending less than they were 13 years ago, even after adjusting for inflation. Taking that away will be devastating, more than anything a referendum can fix. And I think behind the scenes, a lot of school district folks are willing to whisper, we can't sustain this. It's just getting more of them to come forward and say, this is something that can't happen. This is untenable, because a lot of them are afraid to speak out against the teachers union.
There's great teachers, obviously, in this state and throughout the country. However, there are also, there has to be some accountability in these school districts in which the proficiency rates of the students is, at best questionable. And if indeed teachers aren't ensuring that the proficiency rates, that's what they're charged with doing, is teaching children to be proficient. And if the proficiency rates are either more miserable than they are, how can you justify the additional funding that, repealing Act 10 would actually contribute to?
Yeah, there's no reason to think this would have a positive effect on student outcomes. Again, we'd be back to what was known as the steps and ladders method of funding, more than likely, where you stay in the system, do the bare minimum for 30 years, and you'll get an inevitable significant pay increase every year. No rewarding of teachers on merit pay, no rewarding of teachers who are going above and beyond. And also, by the way, no rewarding of teachers in high-demand fields. What was also required in most districts prior to Act 10 was that the science teacher makes the same as the PE teacher, makes the same as the language arts teacher, et cetera. So you can't really reward teachers in those tough-to-get fields for their expertise. So nothing about Act 10 going away would be a positive for students. It might be a positive in some small way to teachers like retirement funds, but obviously that's not what we should truly be concerned about in public education.
Well, and again, I think what was most egregious in those who were opposed to Act 10 was that they could actually defend not making contributions to their own retirement accounts, not making contributions to their own health insurance plans, when those of us who are paying for them have always been required to do both.
It's the biggest outrage, right? All of us that work in the private sector expect that. No one gets, very few people have a job where it's fully funded by your employer, yet that's the expectation that was put on the backs of taxpayers for public sector employees prior to Act 10. It's absurd, and that's what they would be expecting to go back to if Act 10 were to go away. Absolutely.
Yeah, it is madness, and it's a mentality that I guess I continue to have difficulty understanding, is that why, if the person that is directly affected by, or I should say, if the only person that benefits from benefits is he or her himself or herself, then why wouldn't they be asked to make contributions? It's just, to me, it's a no-brainer, and that's really I think the majority of what Act 10 covers is that we are now, as taxpayers, we are now sort of investing in our public employees, but they in turn are also investing in themselves, and they have some skin in the game, or they have some vested interest because they are making contributions themselves.
Absolutely. It's just fundamental fairness, right? It's just, if you're going to have a pretty good retirement, probably a retirement better than most of us in the private sector will even have. Let's expect you to actually pay into it, just like somebody working at the the local bank or the car dealership or the automotive repair shop has to. They should be doing the same thing.
Will Flanders, thanks for joining me this morning. Again, Doctor of Data. That will be your new title. I mean, maybe you can have a chat with Rick Essenberg and see if he'll consider changing it. But I appreciate you joining me. Is there a link on your website to your report on the fiscal threat of reversing Act 10?
Yeah, absolutely. If you go to will-law.org, it'll be right there on the front page and a couple other places as well, but that's the main place to find it.
Well, keep up the great work. Always appreciate you joining me on the show. Hope you have a wonderful week.
You as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Will Flanders from Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. And again, you can go out to will-law.org for all information related to the great things that they are doing in our state.